Welcome back to the Simply Christian Life. I'm Michael Hunn, the Bishop of the Diocese of the Rio Grande, which encompasses New Mexico and the far west part of Texas, and 40% of the U.S.-Mexico border. What follows is part 2 of an interview with Christina Rathbone, the author of the new book, The Asylum Seekers, which talks about a particular moment in time with respect to U.S. government policy with respect to asylum seekers, and particularly goes into who the asylum seekers are and what the ministry has been like for those of us that have been caring for those legally present in the United States while they sought asylum in the United States. In this second part of the interview, Christina Rathbone focuses on how the principles that she learned on the border apply directly to parish ministry in places that are not on the border. Because the reality is that there are migrants and people who are claiming asylum scattered throughout the United States. So the border is not just in the Diocese of the Rio Grande and the other 3 dioceses of the Episcopal Church. The border is everywhere because there are people who have emigrated to the United States living throughout the United States. I want to thank the Reverend Christina Rathbone for her work, brief though it was, in the Diocese of the Rio Grande, and also for the Reverend Canon Lee Curtis, who conducted this interview.
After you were with us, and after we called Ana Reza, a few things happened, and then you ended up back in a parish after having this. And part of the reason I'm saying this, and I know I've done it before, sometimes there's a temptation, which I know is out there, to think of these clergy who do these things, who find themselves in the right place at the right time doing remarkable ministry, as kind of superheroes of the faith in a way that's unattainable, right? Which is not my experience of you. You're amazing.
No superhero, that's for sure.
Right. But you ended up back in a parish after having this experience, kind of transformative, remarkable. What came through for you in that time in the parish, in your parish ministry?
It's such a good question, Lee. So it was my first time being rector of a parish after all these years of ministry. And I was pretty nervous about it because I didn't really know what being a rector of a parish entailed. And in my nervousness, with the help of prayer, I remembered my belief in small, real things, right? And thought to myself, well, I wonder if it works in a parish setting. And I'm here to tell you that yes, it absolutely does. Because what is a parish but a gathering of people, a gathering of manifestations of the divine, each one different from the next, each one with blessings, each one with gifts, and each one with needs. And if I approached members of the parish in the same way that I approached folks on the border, or the same way I approached folks living on the street in Boston, would the same thing happen? And the answer is absolutely yes. Deep, rich relationships between and among people in the parish and the clergy, but not exclusively the clergy, between the clergy and parishioners, and then holding spaces whereby people could deepen their relationship with each other within the parish, leadership, and just people who came to church on Sunday, created such a sense of belonging and of being needed and of being free to express our needs, that combination. And that then becomes the engine for transformation within a parish, transformation within individual people's hearts. And once that starts happening, then groups within the parish start seeking work where they can share that transformation with others. So the focus on the small, the focus on the individual, the focus on small groups, the focus on sort of transforming committees that were vaguely moribund, and by opening them up by saying, we're going to have a worship team meeting. Who would like to come? This is an open meeting. And then creating the space for people to share their truth. That is what tills the soil, in my experience, for a parish to become more deeply rooted in the divine, which then, of course, has benefits, like the proverbial mustard seed growing into the bush, which houses many, many birds. So, yeah, not looking at the big picture. Oh, what are we going to do about X, Y, Z, these problems? But instead looking at the reality that's underneath, always underneath the big picture of this person and this person and this person and the blessings and needs inherent of each individual. It's all about, for me, it's all about that one-on-one relationship and then that small group relationship, which then grows.
So, so let's say with that worship committee, it's been more or less moribund, and that can happen in the Episcopal Church. We have the Book of Common Prayer. We can say prayer A until Jesus comes back, and that's okay for some of us, not okay for everybody. So let's say you have that group, or even within our parishes, we have folks who attend on Sundays. They may or may not know each other. What's the spark, or what's the approach that you've taken to put that kind of soul work on the table? And how have you learned to get that moving in a way that you feel is generative?
Number one, delicious baked goods,
All
which
right.
sounds like a joke, but is actually completely true.
Hmm.
So that was one of my first jobs, finding the best baker in the parish. And she was incredible. She still is. I'm no longer in the parish, but she still is an incredible baker.
Hmm.
That then encourages people to come in person because everything is hybrid these days. And it's really great to have a group of people in person. The second thing is no matter what we were meeting about, it was worship, it was engagement with the broader community, we always started with a brief Lectio Divina, which takes people out of just the brain and starts introducing the brain-heart combination. And it takes 7 or 8 minutes and is so worthwhile. All of us just shifted. You could feel it. We all shift and we shift together. And then inviting people and modeling, telling the truth. Because even if you've been praying prayer A for the past 15 years, people are going to have opinions about that. But many lay people feel intimidated about expressing those opinions because they're not the experts. They don't really know. But their opinions are just as valid as anybody else's. And once you get 2 or 3 people telling the truth, particularly if it's slightly against the ordained leadership, like we know you like this, but I actually don't like that, then other people start daring to tell the truth. And once you have people telling the truth, it becomes a very living, energized meeting. And then the final part is taking some of the smaller suggestions and implementing them straight away so that people then the next Sunday see what I said. I really miss having kneelers, which was something in our parish because we worshipped in rented space. It turned out a whole group of people really missed kneeling to receive communion. I had a kneeler in the rector's office, which I never used. So someone would put the kneeler in their car and that next Sunday brought it. And for people to see that their suggestion had been made manifest the very next week, that in and of itself increased attendance at these meetings the next go round. So it's less efficient. These meetings are less efficient because there's more voices. But no matter what you're doing on the surface of things, talking about worship, the real work is happening underneath that of building and deepening community and trust
Hmm.
and inviting the gifts and the needs of everybody, the gifts and the needs, the gifts and the needs, making church a place where gifts and needs can be exchanged in freedom and trust and safety.
And I think that'll get us to the next point that I'm hearing a lot of feedback from our clergy, from not just clergy here in the DRG, but everybody. Um, I think this is a kind of global piece that we're confronting right now. Um, I feel like there's an impulse right now to distinguish between kind of truth telling and safety. We are in a time where truth telling may not be safe, and there might be congregational systems. I'm not saying that they're out there. Actually, I'm absolutely saying they're out there where truth telling has not been met with a safe response historically, and so we're seeing that out. It's worth saying that certainly the work we've done in El Paso and Ciudad Juarez has not always been safe, nor was the work you did on the streets in Boston always safe in the way that we would think about it. What has been what's the toolkit that you carry with you, or in those spaces where safety feels really thin, or it's just flat out not safe, and yet still being able to connect and find that truth, to find the bravery to enter those spaces. How do you think about that?
So if we're talking about actual safety and lack thereof, like on the border or on
Hmm.
the, that's a very real thing. And I think in places that are unsafe, of which there are many in this world, let's be honest, physically unsafe and unpredictable, um, our only hope really is through community and through the trust and the safety of being with others. And so it's a question, and it does take some small amount of courage to remain in the place that is unsafe rather than seeking to flee, close the door, lock it, close the door, lock it, close the door, lock it, close the door. Okay, I'm safe. So that's the impulse often. And sometimes it may even be the necessity. But most of the time, if we can dare remain, to use that wonderful word from the Gospel of John, and remain vulnerable and lean into the vulnerability of the other, that vulnerability, through some mystical process that I have no understanding of, makes you both braver and safer. And that was, again, the position. I just have to keep going back to Jesus, of Jesus. I'm looking now above my screen at a crucifix I have there of Jesus on the cross. It's an extremely unsafe place to be, but his response is to open his arms, right? To be vulnerable and allow, as I said in that reading before, the everything that we need, we already have within us. Allow that to rise up in the face of the other and to be reflected by the other and to the other. So that at least is the only thing I know how to do in places that are physically unsafe, which are, thanks be to God, in my own life, the anomaly. If you're talking about safety, emotional and psychological safety, which is also really important in the parish, I do think that that is the work of the pastor to encourage, and it's such a good point, Lee. It's why I've missed having conversations with you so much, to
Thank you.
encourage honesty, but honesty in love, not
Mhm.
ripping apart, tearing apart honesty. That's the kind of stuff that happens when people aren't given a voice, right? Then you start shouting because you're not being heard. But if you're given the opportunity to speak, you get to just speak. And so the violence of your truth, even if you're in opposition to another, has gone away because you're not desperate. You know you have a place. You know your voice is welcomed when you agree with others and when you don't agree with others. And that just builds up over time, especially what I always found myself doing was saying, even if someone said, something horrible about my preaching or whatever, horrible to me, possibly very true, my first words out of my mouth, and they were true, were thank you for having the courage to tell the truth, because that's what we're all about in church. The truth will set you free. That's what we're all about. Now let's think about what you just said and let's talk it through. So again, it has to do with the being open and being rooted, I guess, in the end, in the truth of our own belovedness, which for me is often very, very easy to forget about. But I know that when I remember it and root down into it, the depth of my belovedness, the absoluteness of it, then any kind of criticism or even danger becomes much less terrifying to me.
That is a much more mindful process than the ones I have entered into. I've tried to work on this, but I will find myself well into a situation, um, looking back and going like, "Oh, the safe place was back there," and now I have to figure this out. Um, so please do it. Please do it Tina's way and not my way.
No, no, that's my way in the ideal.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
I'm not going
right,
to tell you about all my absolute disasters, which are part of it too, right? Which are
right, right.
also
Oh
part.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, yeah, those situations where I can't remember the specifics of it, but I do remember a few times being right there on the bridge in Juarez, and you and I getting back through the turnstiles, and I was like, that was really bad, right? Like that was not good. But
That's right.
there is holiness in those moments as well.
Retroactive terror. It's a real thing.
It
Yeah, in
is.
the
It
moment
is.
you can't even be aware of it because it's just too overwhelming. Once you're safe, you can be like, Oh my Lord, that was, yeah. I remember leaning against those gates with you often in that posture.
Hmm. Well, and I do think too, we talked a little bit and as we were getting ready to start recording, and you'd mentioned talking about the feeding of the 5,000, which I think this is one of those pieces. This might not have been where you want to go with it, but I'll take the segue, where there is a group of 5,000 people, and there's a little bit of temerity in the disciples' voice as they're coming up to Jesus, like, we have to let them go, or we have to feed them, and feeding them is not possible, right? And it's from that space, right? So I wanted to hear kind of, I know you've been working with that text, which I absolutely love, and wanted to explore that a little bit with you
Yeah,
in this section.
I just want to say clearly in advance, I don't have anything particularly profound to say, and certainly everyone has already had this thought. But that said, what is it? 2 loaves and 5 fishes, 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Um, Absolutely not enough. Indisputably insufficient amount of food to feed 5,000 people, which Jesus very clearly is saying, feed them. So I don't think not a little bit of temerity, but much temerity of just like the impossibility of it all. And yet, somehow, by God's grace, the insufficiency becomes superabundantly enough.
Mm,
So often, I think, and especially in our culture, not enough has become a reason, has become a barrier. It's not enough becomes no. I want to do this thing, but it's not enough, no matter what it is. If it's starting a ministry on the border, if it's developing a Bible study group in a parish, whatever it is, it's very easy to say that is not enough for the big picture problem or problems. There are problems 360 degrees around us. But in fact, if we offer that which is absolutely clearly and indisputably not enough, if we offer it anyway, it becomes enough, if only because it becomes a stepping stone to the next thing or the next possibility or relationship with other people who then are prompted to offer their completely insufficient offering, which then inspires the next person to offer their tiny little crumb of fruitcake. And then bit by bit by bit, you have a feast that is fitting for all and comes from God. It really is a question of faith, but as people of faith, I think we need to embrace not nearly enough as an absolutely superb starting point. So when we have those words in our head, oh, it's not enough, it's like, oh, hallelujah, it's not enough. Let's do that. Let's do that. Because if we get stuck on trying to figure out the thing that is enough, it's like you said earlier on about the border. I mean, what a calamity. Nothing is enough. And so if we try to fix the whole situation on the border, we will be paralyzed. But if we try to work with these people that God has given us, these 5 people, 4 people, 25 people, well, then that becomes hugely enough for us and for the 25 people. And who knows what will come from it? And who knows how many groups of 25 people you had in the shelter, right? You didn't have one group of 25 all along. It was way more than 25 people. So not enough is actually has become for me a signal of excellent place to begin.
mm, mm. And I hear the other side to that, and certainly like that has been true. You know, there are certain numbers that I've held on to. I accompanied 83 people with you on the bridge that got through,
Mm.
and 83, like, I hold that number. And then it was 1700, I think 1728 that we had in the shelter at St. Christopher's up until this most recent pause, right? All in iterations of 25,
1728
which
from the
is not
25,
nearly enough.
but it's the feeding of the 5,000.
Right. And so, but I also know during that experience, and I want to kind of again hearing the the kind of spiritual um, heaviness that there is. How do you maintain your soul in that not nearly enough, right? How do you get the courage to start in not nearly enough, knowing that a bunch of people will be telling you it's not nearly enough? Um, and some people now, I think, with the polarization, starting in one direction, even if it's not nearly enough, for other people is way too much
Mhm.
of this thing. So how do you keep your composure, your soul, your how do you keep the faith?
I think for me, this image that's becoming clear in our conversation is the overarching problems that are up here and then
Hmm.
operating down underneath it. And I think for me, the medicine, the antidote to the anxiety and the fear and the heartbreak of the too muchness of everything that's going on, the only medicine I've found is in the work, the small, real work that is tangible and indisputable that's happening right here. That is the only thing that allows me to breathe. So, from a purely selfish point of view, thinking about my own needs, which are real, doing the work, the not nearly enough work, helps me live another day in hope and faith and trust and love in community with others. And when people see that, they will join you, and your not enough will begin to grow. There are people who will be saying, it's too much, it's too much. And then you have to offer those people pastoral care. But you can't let their it's too much get in the way of what you know is actually not nearly enough. As long as it's real, I'm talking about tiny things. It doesn't matter what it is. Gathering diapers and distributing them to those who don't have enough money to buy diapers. Whatever it may be, if it's real, it counts. It's sort of eternal. And so it has a completely different value from sitting and fretting and becoming destroyed by our powerlessness. We are powerlessness. We are powerless. It's indisputable. We just are. Look at this puny frame. Pretty much anything can slay me. I was in bed for a week with the flu. We are so lacking in power. But if we can accept that and move forward with that truth, things will start to happen because we're all looking for healing, and healing comes through communion. And when people see that healing happening, they will want to join you. And so you started off by saying you drew the line at 25 and it ended up being how many thousand?
1700.
1,700.
Hmm.
That's what happens. And you know, that old tired story of someone throwing back the starfish into the sea. They've all been washed up on the beach. And someone says, well, what's the point? That's just one starfish. It doesn't make any difference. And the person says, well, it made a difference to that starfish. It made a difference to that starfish. If every human being is more valuable than a sparrow who God loves so much, then each person that you do some small thing for, Jesus himself tells us, you do it for Jesus. And that has to be enough,
Hmm.
except when our egos get involved. That has to be enough. What more can we expect from ourselves?
No, and I think that's again been really instructive if you look at the looking at the cycle of the lectionary year. There are only a couple of seasons where we're looking at these big cosmic pieces. And even the Advent season, which we just got out of a few weeks ago, we start out Advent 1, big and cosmic, and then week 2, it's and there was a guy named John.
Right.
Um, and that's been a kind of consistent, again, keeping that soul work even in those individual moments that do build up over time, that do build up over time, and produce a community that's thriving in the work, even if we're not hitting those big horizon pieces. So.
And it is, after all, the way Jesus worked. I mean,
Mhm.
he was living in a time, oh, it was even worse, way worse than our time right now. I mean, in a country that was, you know, literally being run by the oppressor. They had no rights. No Jews had any rights whatsoever, except the right to worship, which was a miracle, but no civil rights, none. And yet Jesus operated on the small scale, right? I mean, the feeding of the 5,000, that was a very big group, 5,000, but usually he's with, you know, maximum 12 people. And
Mhm.
he had all the power in the universe. He could have done anything he wanted, but that was the way he chose to proceed. Small, real encounters with real people and real healing taking place. That's how he did his work. So I wrote just actually in the epilogue of the book, just a couple of pages about this very thing, not nearly enough. So maybe I'll just read that and
Mm.
see how it goes. So this little book has been my attempt to do what small thing I can, both as a human being and a priest. It is not nearly enough, I know, but that is almost always the case, almost all of the time, with almost everything every one of us does. And contrary to the mores of our culture, which eschew and abhor limits of every kind, I continue to believe that acknowledgement of this fact can be generative. More and more, it seems to me that not nearly enough is not a barrier to doing the work so much as a real place to start and then try to build on. Of course, if our efforts seem clearly to be not nearly enough, this is largely because the facts on the ground seem just as clearly to be way too much. Too much to take in, too much to read about sometimes even, and we swipe the page or switch the station and think, later I'll come back to it. Later I'll let myself see. But if you're reading this page, you have let yourself see for at least several hours, and you have let yourself feel, and you have let yourself recognize, I hope, the truth and the power and the dignity and the sanctity of so many of the people on the border. Pope Francis, that great friend of people who have been displaced across the globe, has said repeatedly that in response to this crisis of forced migration, all we wealthier, more stably housed people need is listen to the stories of those who are suffering. That this listening is enough. I'm not sure if this is true. I do believe, though, that the power these stories hold, which is to say, the power that ignites and sustains and dwells deep within the hearts of every one of the people who are primarily affected by the brutality of our borders, has the potential to begin the process of healing for us all. People on the move have a lot to teach the rest of us about what it means to be human, that's the thing. Forced to confront their own fear and vulnerability as they navigate levels of hardship many of the rest of us are protected from, they've learned more about their need for hope and help and peace than the rest of us, and so also more about how we might get there one day together. But for us to learn, we must let them teach us. And to do that, we must first let go of our terrified attempts to remain powerful and secure and set apart from the fray. No number of walls of brick or metal or comfort or privilege will keep the suffering of the world at bay. It is simply impossible. We have a better chance of reducing the grief of the world by opening ourselves, even briefly, to its fullness, and then by daring to approach those who are most obviously suffering, fully aware of all we do not yet know and cannot yet see, and so wanting to learn and grow as much as to give. If we are to have even a chance of making things better along our own borders, then our task needs to involve as much listening and learning as it does practical work to alleviate whatever small part of the suffering we can. And not for the sake of migrants and asylum seekers only, but also for ours. We are all reduced by keeping so much apart, that's the thing. And we are all impoverished. Because the truth of life revealed in the broken places, which is to say, the truth of hope and of need and of love, is as essential to those of us who live in comfort as it is to those who do not yet. This isn't as easy as it sounds. Even if we do honestly desire to help make the world a better place, spending time with individuals is a slow, pitifully local way to do it. The truth is that I often felt useless, walking over the bridge into Juarez every day, with no plan beyond class for the kids and, most days, a walk up to the checkpoint and its accompanying, disempowering, deflating, sometimes enraging walk back down again. Why am I doing this, I'd ask? What is the point? The questions still feel very real, even all this time later, and I find myself answering them again the way I always did. Because in this way, I share at least a little in the suffering and real powerlessness of the people, and somehow leaning into that, the action itself, I mean, the act of leaning in draws me into the power of God, which only those who know their own powerlessness seem to have access to. And with this power, what? I was able to write this book, perhaps, and you have been able to read it. And from here, who knows? One thing I'm certain about, the border is everywhere in our country today, its effects and also its people. Families from the street by the Paso del Norte bridge are right now making lives in the big cities, small towns, and rural communities of every state of this country. If you choose, it would be simple to find ways to connect with them. But what good would that do, I hear you say? It's not enough. And I know, believe me, I know how you feel. But then I remember, not enough is better than nothing. Not enough, once accepted, keeps us going and leads us on. Not enough, in the end, draws us towards each other in love and awareness of our mutual need. And when that happens, well, when that happens, you will know.
Well, Tina, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the time. And so I also want, this is the plug that we'll put for multiple points. You're going to be with us in person in Albuquerque on
The 16th
March 16th.
and
Well,
15th, I think.
yeah. So, okay, we'll edit that out. So you're going to be with us in person at the cathedral for a reading of your new book, The Asylum Seekers, which comes out on March 18th, anywhere books are sold. And we'll be doing a reading and a bit of a panel discussion. This is a victory lap in some ways for RGBM and the work that we've done, particularly with Asylum Seekers since 2019. And so Ana Reza and I and Tina will be there at the cathedral at 5 p.m. on the evening of the 15th to talk about what this experience has been, how it's grown, how it got started, some of the philosophy underlying the ministry. And then you'll be preaching at the 11 a.m. service at the Cathedral of St. John on the 16th. So we will be up in Albuquerque in person if you want more of this conversation. And on that Saturday night, particularly. So if any clergy here are hearing it, want to dive deeper, you can come see us there. We'd love to have that conversation. So Tina, thank you so much.
Thank you, Lee.
You always have a place here. You always got a home
Thank
here.
you.
Anytime you want to come out, we're happy to have you.